Hello, everyone. This is Tim Thomas, and I'm about to be interviewed by ABC Radio's Steve Austin regarding the night of the ambush and what exactly happened. I get a lot of questions. What exactly happened that night? Steve Austin is a fantastic interviewer. I really enjoyed my time with him. I know you're going to enjoy this interview as well. If you want more information on myself, check out my website, www.yourcommando.com, or visit my YouTube channel, Commando in Your Corner. Once you're there, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit notifications. I like putting positive content out there. I love serving my country, and I still love serving it in any capacity I can. Enjoy the interview.
Alrighty. All right, well, I just want you to tell me, first of all, just a basic outline of what you were doing for the Australian military overseas, whatever you can.
I was deployed as a Australian Special Forces Commando, and in 2009 we were in Afghanistan. We were conducting operations outside the wire to off-centre the enemy's what's called centre of gravity, which is, it denies them to be able to move freely around the place, and it denies them being able to, carry out their mission because they're so concerned about our mission of disrupting them.
So what's a commando's role normally? What does a commando do other than what we see in movies in Hollywood?
Well, it's certainly not what you get at recruiting or in the movies. But basically, if you think of an infantry unit that has a lot more different insertion skills and a lot more different weapons, we can conduct operations at length and get into places other people can't in numbers. So, special forces, you might have a small group inserting in to a particular location with a high amount of efficiency. Picture, a group of 100 blokes going to the same efficient insertion methods and arriving en masse.
And it's different from recruitment. What did you expect, or what did they say it was at recruitment?
It's a bit of a throwaway line for those people in the unit. When things happen, we sort of say, "Oh, they didn't tell us about this at recruiting," where it's sort of, the promo video of explosions and jumping out of airplanes. There's what happens in the movies, and then there's what happens in real life, and that's about the difference between what we thought would happen and what actually happened. Yeah,
not unlike life, really. Often.
Yeah, and I always think soldiers are just like regular humans, but they experience life a bit more acutely. People get into fatigue every now and then. A soldier will get into a point of fatigue where, he'll destroy his body, destroy his, endocrine system, which is hormone system, and, learn to live off painkillers because that's just what they think is normal. And people experience that in, regular life, but, soldiers tend to take things to the next level, which actually, to me, actually makes them really good healers, because if they can come back from that point of, fatigue, they can help others on their journey as well. And this is, I've been out of the army now for 9 years, and that's pretty much been my journey since then, getting over my own point of fatigue and disrepair, getting into, and then seeing other people who are in that same state, helping them, and now, helping others on their journey back to, wholeness. So as much as I've come from that extreme, it actually really aided me in being an effective healer of others.
Did you expect it to be a journey when you first joined? You entered the recruiting office, joined the army. Was it sort of thinking, this is going to be an exciting life journey, or what was it?
I was struck with quite an amount of, because it wasn't, I'd applied for a lot of jobs, and this was a job that I got, and one of the only reasons I applied for this one is the Australian government had what's called a DRSF scheme, which was direct recruiting into special forces, and that really appealed to me, and the cutoff date was 30, and I was just about to turn 30, and I thought, well, I might regret not doing this. But then when I got to recruiting, when I got to this swearing in ceremony, and the guy at the front says, "Does anyone have any second thoughts?" I'm like, shit, I've got second thoughts. and it really tore me up because this was the first time I was doing something and I had second doubts about it. And if I doubt myself, then something bad's going to happen. And I think, geez, I'm going to die here, you know. And so I had all this stuff going on in my head. So my state of awareness, I couldn't. It was. I felt like I was stepping into a Ferris wheel that was going to take me on this ride, and it's going to be. I don't know when I'm going to get off this thing.
What does doubt do to you? What does doubt do to the human mind? You said the word doubt with a lot of passion then. What does doubt create in the mind and the body, Tim Thomas?
The short answer is fear. And fear immobilizes a person to the point where they think it's impossible to go forward. There's... In the first chapter of the book, I'll stick to the short answers right now, but yeah, doubt it creates extreme fear when your body's in one place and your head wants to be somewhere else. That essentially is what doubt and fear creates. And the bigger the distance between, you know, your body's doing one thing and your mind wants to do another, the bigger the distance, the greater the doubt, the greater the fear, and quite often the greater the mental illness if you continue in that state.
So the body and the mind are in conflict.
Yes, and whether the person articulates it or not, people talk about gut feelings, gut instincts. That's where it's at. When there's a place you know you should be, but you're not, there's that imbalance that you can live like that, but it creates an incredible imbalance.
Does the body or the mind win with that tussle, or does nobody win?
What ends up happening is the person looks around and goes, well, everyone else is doing it. You know, I'll do it too. It's kind of what I call sheeple behaviour. And that's the short answer to that.
Before you head out on patrol, before you actually leave your safe zone, whatever the base is, what happens? What preparations are normally made before you go out into the night?
It does depend on the length of time outside the wire. There's a lot of O groups, which are order meetings where you get a brief, you know, some people call it death by PowerPoint, where they tell you about 1,000 different threats because, you know, Afghanistan has quite a long history of conflict. So there's a number of different threats you've got to look out for, you know, different mines from different countries and different ways of triggering, you know, roadside bombs or IED, improvised explosive devices. And then there's your personal preparation, you know, making sure you've got your bombs and bullets in check, making sure your vehicle is working the way it's supposed to work. And there's a lot of tail chasing. And when we're all lined up, the Padre comes out and blesses the vehicle. And on this one particular patrol, you know, he's going down, you know, blessing the vehicles. And we happen to be the last vehicle in this convoy. And the Padre sort of looked up and says, "Oh, you're the last vehicle," and we're like, "Yeah," and he goes, "Oh, I better bless you twice," you know, and it was you know, we had a bit of dark humour with that, but
what's the thing about the last vehicle? Why does even the Padre know that the last vehicle needs extra help?
Last vehicle is the least defended, and it's the one that's usually attacked. The reason we were to the rear of the convoy on this occasion was because we were mortars, and it was a tactical decision that if the front guys got into a contact, then we'd get our mortars down and onto the enemy effectively, because quite often contacts in Afghanistan happen from rather long distances away. So mortars are a very effective tool in you know, countering, you know, attacks and ambushes and all that.
So the Padre sees that you're in the last vehicle. He says, right, you get a special dose.
Yeah, and I'm like, geez, you know, why don't you dose everyone twice if you got to double down, you know? But yeah, no, it was a bit of a giggle.
So you head out from your base, and what goes through a commando's mind as they drive out into what I assume is the unknown? What's going through your mind as you're first leaving the base and you've gone through your zone out into the open?
Well, when you first leave base, you are tooled up, ready to rock and roll. You feel awesome, 6 foot tall. Here you are with your brothers, ready to do what we need to do. And I'm a bit older than the average soldier, so at that point, I see everyone's like, yeah, all right, and I'm like, nah, man, there's going to come a point in this journey where we're going to be fatigued, so let's not burn too early. So I deliberately relax myself because I know I've got to save it for later on when the hard times come, because it's when you're leaving, you've got your brothers around you, you're ready to go. That's the time for me to be conserving energy. So when you're stepping into a week or two down the track, you need that energy.
Is it hard to control adrenaline? And is adrenaline your friend or your enemy?
If you can control, I'm not Buddhist, but they've got a really good saying: if you can control your breathing, you can control everything. Learning to control your breathing through your nose goes a long way to controlling your adrenalized state. There is a time and a place for adrenaline, but we are not wired like antelope that are continually aware of threat. We can only do that for so long before we start, becoming very fatigued. And in that state of fatigue, we're not much good to anybody. So the only way, because, there are potential threats everywhere. The only way I made my peace with it was to come to the conclusion was this: you know what? This is their territory. They're probably going to get the first shots in. Okay, I can't stop them shooting at me or my team, but I can control my reaction time. So I always had myself set up in such a way that I could rapidly take my weapon off safe and put rounds back down range as fast as possible. And the other thing is you also have to realize that you're always being observed. So if you're got that awareness about yourself where you're scanning but you're not hyper vigilant, but you look like you're doing your job, people will look at that and go, these guys will respond rapidly if but if I was like hyper vigilant one day and then apathetic the next, they'd know when to pick their times. So I always sort of think, relax. You're not going to be able to stop them attacking by being hypervigilant, but you can maintain, say, a 5 or 6 out of 10, 24 hours a day, day in, day out, with or without sleep, and know that when those shots are fired, you've got those what's called actions on, the actions you need to take to actually put rounds back downrange.
What's it like to know that you're always being watched, that someone has always got their eyes on you? What's that like? What does that do to a soldier? I assume it's the same for any person. What's it like to know that constantly you're being watched?
I just assumed it, so it didn't play in the back of my mind too much. I'm like, that's just a given. When we went to the more rural areas, there was certainly more resistance to our presence being there. I remember, and this is I don't think I've spoken about this because it's funny, inverted commas, but we give out lollies to the kids. It's always good to have kids around, good for and you also know if there's no kids around, something bad's probably going to happen. I remember giving this handful of lollies to these kids, and they ran off, and when this old guy, when he thought we're around the corner, I could just see around this bend, this old guy came up and took the lollies off the kids, ripped them open, stomped them into the dirt, and then squatted down to take a piss on them. They were that against any kind of interaction with, the forces that were going on their territory.
So you're controlling adrenaline, you're being watched, at the same time you're trying to reach out to locals, and as you're driving through a terrain, you see old military weaponry from a time gone by. Tell me the story of seeing the empty tanks.
Oh, look, these guys, the Afghan people, use their home terrain to great advantage, and they are very intelligent. You'd be a big mistake to think that they're not intelligent. These guys can wire a blade of grass that if you kick, it'll explode, and that's literal. And there, when we get there, there's Russian tanks everywhere. These guys would simply wait until these tanks would go into a valley, and they know that their turrets can only lift to a certain height, and these guys would just mess up a whole company worth of tanks that were rendered completely ineffective because the land didn't allow these tanks to raise their turrets and shoot back. So these guys, they don't have any high-tech weaponry like we do, but they use it to high effect. So, we have night vision, they don't. But what they do is wait for the sun to be right on the horizon. They know where we are, and then they'll start firing at us right where the sun is. And you can't pick where those bullets are coming from. The only advantage of that is you sort of look at where the sun is and like, okay, the sun's about here. If we're going to get attacked, it's about now. So you sort of get ready to stand to and respond in kind.
How did you feel when you're driving past these tanks that are disabled from a previous great global power, knowing that these guys who you were facing were sharp enough to disable a tank and know how high its barrel could lift, things like that? What went through your mind when you saw this? Because you weren't in tanks, you were in light armour.
Yeah, well, the Australians did have the Bushmaster with a V-shaped hull, really good bit of kit, but most special forces kicked around in what's called a light skin vehicle, which is basically a four-wheel drive with a roof cut off and a few machine guns in place. They gave us a few little plates of armour, sort of put in little things, but it was basically, think of those African safari shows where they're driving around the plains of Africa, and there's just this four-wheel drive, no roof, and you've got all-round observation, but obviously everyone else can see you. The tanks, well,
you're seeing these things, and you're seeing what's happened to them, and you're not in anything that's anywhere near the level of armour.
True, but we also, I think you can underestimate. I think you can let your technology do the work for you, and you've got faith in this stuff that you possibly shouldn't. Like, these guys had their faith in their tanks, but the Afghans were like, well, we can work around that, and it's quite a shock to somebody when you've got your faith in a piece of kit and that kit don't work for you. In fact, it ends up making you an easy target. So we conducted ourselves in a way that we were obviously there as a combat mission, but we weren't like the Yanks driving around in these bank vaults with wheels, because that's like the Daleks coming to town. There's a man in there somewhere, but they're in these, big fridge with wheels. But we talked to the locals, we interacted with them, and these locals were quite used to war. I'd throw soft drinks to these kids, and every now and then one would hit a rock and sort of, soda would piss out of it, and the kids would do a perfect grenade drill. Even the little ones, boom, perfect grenade drill. They just dive away from it, feet facing it, hands away from it. I'm like, wow, these guys have seen some rough stuff, and even the kids know grenade drills. Yeah.
So what happens, or what's the response when you put your faith in the wrong place? You warned about putting too much faith in the technology. So let me ask you about what happens when you put your faith in the wrong place.
Let me just say, there's nothing more frustrating than when a piece of kit fails to work when it's supposed to. And it takes a highly disciplined person to take the actions needed to correct that. So on all our weapon systems, we've got stoppage drills. So if something stops, we know, and we drill it. So when we're in, a contact, there's adrenaline. You don't lose your motor skills. You just go to your, You just go to your actions on. But when you have a piece of kit that says it'll function in this environment, and you think it does and then it doesn't, there's probably nothing worse than being left completely defenseless, and standing there with your hands in your pockets, and that's about it.
So putting your faith in the wrong place leads you to be completely and utterly vulnerable.
Yeah, in a position of absolute vulnerability, and soldiers, that's not what we are about. We're there to influence that area positively and hopefully influence the area powerfully and hopefully positively as well.
Right, we'll leave that section. All right, this is section 3 with Tim. So you're out. You know you're being watched all the time. You go past the Soviet-era tanks. You see them trashed. And you know some patterns of the enemy. Take me to that night. What happened that particular night when you were heading into what you call the kill zone?
Well, like I mentioned in the book, there was a range of emotions on top of, we got the order, put the heavy vehicles to the rear. There's a rocket-propelled grenade ambush waiting ahead. And then, this vehicle cuts us off. Now, that could have been an accident, could have been on purpose, but you can imagine what we were thinking. We just got cut off, and we knew the gravity of the situation.
So, forgive me, I'm going to wind it back. So you take it just back to that before you get to the kill zone. You're driving down a section of terrain. Just start from that point there. You're driving down the terrain.
What, pre-contact or yes, what's going on in my head?
Pre-contact. Yeah.
Okay, well, something I don't talk about in the book, I'll mention now, because I really didn't know how to articulate it properly, but I'll say it now. I used something that I was later to term the stadium of your mind. Now, when we were little, our stadium was small, and it only ever occupied one emotional state and one or two thoughts at any given time. But as we age, we get more and more sections in that stadium. So the stadium of our mind, it's not just, you go into a big stadium, it's not just two teams that are interested in what's going on in the center. There's a variety of different sections. And all the experiences we have, especially the painful ones, create different sections in our stadium. So we might be going forward to, for a piece of action, for some sort of action, but then there's inner conflict. So, if anyone's felt any inner conflict, that's generally the stadium of your mind arguing about what to do next. And basically all the different parts of your stadium, they're not always your best friend, because all those different sections want to increase their share of influence of what's going on in the center. So I'm a ex-soldier. My fight or flight reflex was highly attuned. So I go into the civilian world, and I've got this massive section of my stadium in fight or flight. And guess what that wants to do? It wants to feed itself and remain dominant. So even when there was no threats around me, this part of my stadium was so powerful, it had me seeing threats that weren't even there, so it could get the lion's share of my energy. So I'm going into that ambush, and I realized the people who have done this before are the Anzacs. That made me feel no longer alone. And then I had that sequence of thinking going from connecting back into my mind, connecting back into my body, connecting back into my team, and then to the realization of, whether it's in 5 minutes, if they're going to find my body, they're not going to find it with any bullets left. I'm expending all ammunition. And I reached what I call totality, where your whole mind is completely focused on one thing, and it's quite peaceful. But the problem, Steve, was I had to wait. And waiting, oh my gosh, it is the worst thing. Like when bullets start to fly, when the bad stuff, well, not bad, just the stuff starts happening, then your whole mind switches into, this is what we need to do next, and it's amazing. Time for me actually slows down. I'm quite clear in my thinking, but when you're waiting for it to happen, I can't imagine anything worse. So here I am, I'd reached totality, everything's going to be doing this, but then in the period of waiting, my mind would switch between everything's going to be fine to everything's going to go bad. And fear really comes from fear of loss. So all the things that you want to hang on to create a lot of fear. So I noticed fear would creep back in the second I started looking to things I didn't want to lose, like, oh, my family, and that would create so much fear, because then those parts of the stadium of my mind would go, great, we can feed the fear section, because I'd just sort of effectively kicked them out and they were trying to get back in. So I was flicking back and forth between those two states of being. And again, I didn't mention this in the book, Steve, but the year before, I'd done an exchange with the British Special Forces, and they do something that the Australians probably did at one stage, but we don't do anymore. And they actually, they do quite a bit of singing. And they asked me, oh, do you want to sing a song? I'm like, hell no, we don't sing anymore in the Australian Army. But they said, no, it's part of what we do. And so I sung, they asked me to sing Waltzing Matilda, and after I dusted out the words, I sung it, and I must say it was enjoyable, and the only way, Steve, that I could, so picture this, a young Aussie soldier about to go into battle, and he starts to sing under his breath. Obviously, it's not something that you want to stay tactical, but I actually start to sing.
And when you sing, what happens to the body or to the mind or to the heart?
Everything aligns. Everything starts to, all the empowered parts of the stadium, consciously or not, just line up, say, this is what we're doing, and it's this real sense of connection, and that, whatever happens next, the fear section in the stadium will not control it.
And the Brits taught you this, or helped you rediscover this?
Absolutely. I think, at some point the Australian Army did do that, but now we no longer. So I went in. So whenever I became fearful, which was quite a bit, I used to sing this song.
So singing is a way of controlling or redirecting the energy that fear draws on.
Well, singing is an action, and like I said in the first chapter, people don't understand fear if they say the opposite of fear is love, because they don't understand the goal of fear. The goal of fear is to immobilize you. So the opposite of fear isn't love, it's action. Okay? And singing is an action. Singing connects your breathing to your mind, to the words, to an intent that the whole body and mind is sharing. And once you're in that moment and you're connected, you're very powerful. Powerful enough to overcome the fear and have whatever actions that are next to be yours to control. Now, I just thought I'd jump in here. You might have to adjust your volume, but Steve suggested that I include the song that I sang on that night. I haven't sung this song very much since 2009. It's really only ever on maybe an Anzac Day or a Remembrance Day, and that's only if the opportunity presents. Or the other caveat I have about singing this song is if a senior veteran requests it. It's highly emotional. I'm not a singer, I'm a soldier, but I used to sing this song whenever I had to control my fear. So I ended up singing it quite a bit, and I just want you to picture a Australian soldier going into battle with this song on his lips. I hope you get as much from it as I did. The interview will continue afterwards. You'll just have to adjust your volume. Enjoy the song. When I was a young man, I carried a pack, and I lived the free life of a rover. From the Murray's green banks to the dusty outback, I waltzed me Matilda all over. Then in 1915 my country said, son, it's no time for roving, there's work to be done. And they gave me a tin hat, and they gave me a gun, and they sent me away to the war. And the band played Waltzing Matilda as the ship pulled away from the quay. And amidst all the cheers, flag waving and tears,
we sailed off for Gallipoli. How well I remember that terrible day when our blood stained the sand and the water, and how in that hell that they call Suvla Bay we were butchered like lambs at the slaughter. Johnny Turk, he was waiting, he primed himself well, showered us with bullets and rained us with shell, and in 10 minutes flat he'd blown us to hell. Nearly blew us right back to Australia. But the band played Waltzing Matilda as we stopped to bury the slain. We buried ours, and the Turks buried theirs. Then we started all over again. They collected the cripples, the wounded and lame, and they shipped us back home to Australia. The armless, the legless, the blind and insane, all the brave wounded heroes of Suvla. And when our ship pulled into Circular Quay, and I looked at the place where me legs used to be, I thank Christ there was nobody waiting for me to grieve or to mourn or to pity. But the band played Waltzing Matilda as they carried us down the gangway. But nobody cheered, they just stood there and stared, and then turned their faces away. So now every April I sit on my porch and I watch the parade pass before me, and I see my old comrades how proudly they march, reliving old dreams and past glory. But the old men march slowly, their bones stiff and sore, tired old men from a tired old war, and the young people ask, what are they marching for? And I ask myself the same question. And the band plays Waltzing Matilda, and the old men they answer the call. But year by year those old men disappear. Soon no one will march there at all. And their ghosts may be heard as you pass by that billabong. You'll come a-waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda. You'll come a-waltzing Matilda with me. And he sang as he watched and waited till his billy bowed. You'll come a-waltzing Matilda with me. Sing it if you know it. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda. You'll come a-waltzing Matilda with me. And he sang as he watched and waited till his billy bowed. You'll come a-waltzing Matilda with me.
All right, so you're managing fear through different techniques. So what happened that night?
You know, if someone asked me that, a lot of people have asked me that, I'd in the past say, you're going to have to buy me a few more beers. But essentially, going into it, you know, obviously, everyone lived. I've still got my, parts and all that. But for whatever reason, the RPGs didn't fire. We didn't get ambushed. I just sort of sung this song through the kill box, and that was it. We got shot up on plenty of other occasions and rocketed and mortared, but not that night.
And why do you think that was?
There's any number of reasons. I mean, these guys don't really have night vision, so they might have thought, no, not a good idea. I could only guess,
So you had warning that there was an ambush up ahead. You knew what you were driving into, and you knew the tactical situation, and there was a cluster about getting everyone in the right position. So you were extremely vulnerable at that time, and yet the RPGs didn't fire.
And you know what? It'd almost be easier if they did fire, because then you just switch into your drills. It's when you're waiting for this thing before it happens. That's what was. It's felt like sitting in a pot of acid until I actually. I mean, the thing is that, like I said, there was plenty of other times where bullets and rockets and mortars were flying, but on that occasion, it was the one time we knew it was coming, and I got an experience of what it was like in the build-up before an event. And there's that saying, fear of death is worse than death itself, So that incredible fear, that incredible energy in me, I got an experience of what it is to handle that ball, so to speak, and what it taught me was that, at the end of the day, us as humans, we need to feel connected. If we don't feel connected to others, we start becoming immobilized. And when we stop moving our bodies or even our minds, and I want to say movement, it's movement in your head and movement in your body, that's the breeding ground for all the worst things to grow. So just like the opposite of fear isn't love, it's action. Inactivity, whether it's in your mind or your body, breeds fear. You see how that works?
So fear is worse than the actual event itself happening.
It is 10 times worse, and a lot of people say to me, I've never experienced fear. I've never been, to those places where my life has been at risk. But here's the thing. Yes, a soldier might experience it more regularly because it's part of their job, but the body can't really tell the difference between a dead lion or a saber-toothed tiger, because when survival's at stake, cortisol levels are just as high. So you see these, say, business people or people that are overworked in jobs with tight deadlines in a stressful situation, they're often displaying symptoms of PTSD because they've had themselves in a situation where they've perceived it as life and death, or their mind hasn't seen the difference between the two, and their cortisol system the stress hormones have been off the charts, and you can only sustain that for so long.
Is that what happens when blokes come back from some sort of service overseas and they come back into civilian life? It's almost like they're in a state of constant fear rather than any actual danger. Is that what's...
I mentioned it before when I spoke about the stadium of your mind. You've got these parts of your mind that have been developed that, and they're not... all the different teams in your stadium, they're not friendly, and they're not your friends. They will quite actively try and influence what happens in the center, and what they want is all your attention. So say when someone comes back from service and they've got a developed fight or flight reflex, they'll look around and it can be a really safe day, but what they'll do is start seeing it when it's not even there. So that part of your stadium can get the energy that it wants to maintain itself and take over. If you start enjoying yourself, it starts going, hang on, he's enjoying himself. We can't have that. Let's direct his attention to all the things that could be a potential threat. Okay, and it happens without us even knowing it. So the only way I've been able to break this down is, picturing myself walking into the biggest stadium I've ever seen, and there's all these different sections wearing different colours, and they're all jostling to influence what happens in the centre. So they want, and the choices I make in the centre directs energy to those different people. So if I get up and in the morning I let's say exercise for the right reason, that puts energy to the more empowered parts of me. Okay, if I'm walking through my day and I'm not conscious of this battle going on in my own stadium, then I'll often naturally just start growing the negative side of things. There's a term called rumination where you can have a single thought. So imagine like just a single thought, a single section of the stadium of your mind, and if you focus on that 2% thought will go from 4% to 8%, 16, 32, etc., until it takes up the whole thing, until your whole body is consumed by this one particular thought. And here's the mind-body connection on this one, Steve, and I found this fascinating, was that, in my case, it was the fight or flight reflex. If I tried to ignore that, it would like, okay, he's ignoring us, we're going to dig down into the body and create tension. So that fight or flight part of me, without me even knowing, it would dig down to my stomach and create tension in my stomach and on the back of my neck. Okay, and that tension sent energy to the fight or flight, and then it started feeding back and forth. The more tense I got, the more I got apprehensive, the more it fed back and forth. There was this loop going on that I was trying not to choose, but it was growing bigger and bigger in the background. So the first thing I had to do to start being in control of my stadium was take that deep, slow breath through your nose and out, and go, right, where is the tension in my body? Okay, here it is in my stomach. I'm going to relax that. Here it is between my shoulder blades. I'm going to relax that. And all of a sudden, the sting comes out of the stop. You stop that feedback loop. And what I learnt was you can break the rumination cycle, because it only takes 2 or 3 minutes to go from 2% to 100% where you feel all consumed. If you can realize that and do something completely different that distracts you. It could be tapping your head, it could be singing a song, it could be looking at the detail of your own hand, something that distracts you, that'll break that rumination cycle. And that was very effective, because this stuff would be happening, and you're trying to function while your stadium is really working against you, and you come home, you wonder why you're so exhausted, and then you can't sleep because your brain's not in a state of rest, because fight or flight tells us, and it's very evil, that the second you drop your guard, something bad's going to happen, and it's going to be your fault.
Why is blame significant? In other words, if it's going to be your fault, why is that a thing?
Well, it doubles down on the negative feedback. So I'm in fight or flight. I'm quite on the dark side of, well, something bad's going to happen, and I could be around relaxed people, and that was worse, because if something bad started to happen, they wouldn't even know it's happening. So I have to be aware for these people. I have to protect them, because they're not going to know it's going to happen. And that sort of gives you a sense of control, because if I'm responsible for these people, that gives me a purpose. But then I'm to blame if something bad happens and I don't see it coming. So you see how that sort of, and then that fear of blame then is great for that negative parts of you. That's great. We can get even more energy out of this guy.
So the real battle in any situation is actually battling the fear, not the thing itself.
Yeah, your interpretation. So picture this. You're in the stadium, and this often happens to people. There's someone that pisses you off, right? And their thought goes through your head. It's not actually them. It's that part of your stadium that wants you to be pissed off. And picture, have you ever seen those people, they all hold up a particular poster and it forms one big picture? Okay, so part of the stadium all holds up an individual poster and it forms this really big picture, and it could be the picture of that person that's pissed you off, okay, or that thing that you are fearful of, all right? But what that does is it makes you stare at that part and then give energy to that part and grow that part, because all that part wants to do is grow. It's not your friend, it just wants to grow. That's all it wants. And so what I've literally had to do, Steve, is okay, this is what's happening in my mind. It's not that person, it's not that thing. I have to address this part of the stadium. So I will walk up to that part of the stadium and I will hit my hand on one of the posters. And behind that poster is a me standing behind, holding that up. And I say, listen, I know you've served me well, but right now you need to know this isn't helpful. I need you to be appropriately sized, okay? And know that you're still valued, you're still here, and then that part of the stadium starts to shrink down. And at the end of the day, as much as that part might fight it, it's the best thing for them and it's the best thing for everyone else. So it's almost like creating a communal thought in your own headspace. But to me, it just helped break down the individual parts of your own mind that often didn't work for you. Because you can have people think, well, I'm in this stress, and instead of dealing with it, they'll go and do something that makes them feel better. They'll pursue joy. I'll do the things that make me happy, but that's not going to work if you've got your own sort of stadium turning on itself. Temporary if best. So to me, firstly realizing it's happening, and then addressing that part of yourself, showing them it's not acceptable, but it is loved, and you'll always have a place. And when it comes time to step up, I know you will. I trust you. I hope you enjoyed the Tim Thomas, Steve Austin interview. I certainly enjoyed speaking with Steve Austin. He is a great interviewer. If you want to know more about me, please visit www.yourcommando.com, or please visit my YouTube site called Commando in Your Corner. There's always fresh videos being put up, so be sure to like, subscribe, and click the notifications button. I enjoyed serving when I was in the Army, and I still enjoy serving now. Don't forget www.yourcommando.com, or on YouTube, the channel Commando in Your Corner. See you there. And have a great day.